Praise be to God, there is no other God except God. I went to Walmart about a week ago, a grocery store, a supermarket. I prepared a questionnaire for the people who exited at the exit door. The questionnaire had only one question. Who is Jesus according to you? And I asked the same question to about 100 people, and all the Christians who responded either answered Lord or Savior or Lord and Savior. And all the Muslims who answered said a prophet, except for one of them who said just a person. So according to Christians, Jesus is Lord and Savior, and according to Muslims, a prophet and just a person. And the collection of these answers reveals the deep, totally unnecessary biases which these two groups have against each other. One group is deeply overestimating the role of Jesus in this world, while the other group is deeply underestimating the role of Jesus in this world. None of these two groups, not even once, did they mention that Jesus is the Messiah, even though that is the best answer, both according to the Quran and to the Bible. The Quran mentions Jesus as a prophet about 4 times in total, but it mentions Jesus as the Messiah a total of 10 times. And yet the Muslims mentioned him as a prophet every time, but the word Messiah did not come to anyone's mind when asked who Jesus was. Can you see the deep conscious or subconscious bias which the so-called Muslims have in relation to Jesus? On the other hand, the Christians, when asked who Jesus is, they never answered the Messiah either. They always said Lord and Savior. Again, this reveals their deep conscious and subconscious bias in relation to Jesus. Their answer does not go in line with the New Testament, where the same question was asked to Peter, the disciple of Jesus, and his answer was not like theirs. In the New Testament, the book of Mark, chapter 8, starting from verse 27, we read that when Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi, on the way there he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others say one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." So if Christians were not biased about Jesus, they should have answered exactly the way Peter answered, that Jesus is the Messiah. According to the Bible, this answer, that Jesus is the Messiah, was revealed to Peter by God himself. And therefore this makes Peter the first person besides Jesus to publicly testify that Jesus is the Messiah. And by the way, I know that Jesus is called Lord by many people in many places in the Bible, but many other people are also called Lord in the Bible. In the Bible, the word Lord simply means a slave owner. For example, in the book of Luke, chapter 16, verse 3, in Luke chapter 20, verse 13, in the book of Acts, chapter 25, verse 26, in the book of 1 Peter, chapter 3, verse 6, in all these cases, in the New Testament, the word Lord is used to refer to someone else other than Jesus. So the word Lord does not uniquely specify the identity of Jesus. There are many lords mentioned in the Bible. To this day, they have lords in Great Britain. They gather in the House of Lords. Even in the Quran, there is an instance where Joseph, who was a slave, called his owner Lord. So there are many lords in the Bible and the Quran. Of course, there's only one Lord of the universe, God, but there are many lords of different slaves and many different lords who own different properties and so on. Also, there are many prophets mentioned in the Bible and the Quran, but there is only one Messiah. So the word Messiah uniquely specifies and defines the identity of Jesus, which is why if the Christians and the so-called Muslims were unbiased communities, that should have been the first word which came to their mind in most of the cases when they are asked who is Jesus. Most of them should have said the Messiah. That's what defines him. But instead, none of them said it. How deeply biased are they? How deeply do they overestimate Jesus in the case of Christians? And how deeply do they underestimate Jesus in the case of the Muslims? And by the way, saying that Jesus is the Messiah is what annoys one of God's biggest opponents the most. One of God's biggest opponents, according to the New Testament and the Quran, the Jews, when speaking about Jesus, they hate it the most when you say that Jesus is the Messiah. They are not as jealous, for example, if you say that Jesus was a prophet. They had many prophets, and one more prophet wouldn't make a big difference to them. Also, when Christians tell them that Jesus is Lord, they do not hate it as much either, because they find it ridiculous and an unnecessary thing to challenge, because it is very clear in the Old Testament that there is only one God. According to the Jews, the Christians are simply discrediting themselves when they say that Jesus, the Son of Mary, is God, because it's so obvious in the Old Testament that there is only one God. But when the Jews hear that Jesus is called the Messiah, that is what they hate hearing the most about Jesus. The truth hurts them because they rejected the one who was supposed to be their king and their savior, like David was, even more. And their excuse for rejecting him is the fact that he did not fulfill his political mission. They wanted someone who elevates the Jews in the political arena of the world, and not someone who exposes their evil intentions. And their argument doesn't stand because in the second coming of Jesus, after we get resurrected, Jesus will fulfill his expected political mission as well. He will be king on earth for 1,000 years, where all the believers will enjoy a material life here on earth without any imperfection. But anyway, the Jews rejected him, which is clearly evil, but in this video I'm focusing more on those who claim to accept Jesus, the Christians and the Muslims. As I said, the Christians and the Muslims either overestimate Jesus deeply or underestimate Jesus deeply. They can't seem to have a balanced opinion. And let me give you an example how their bias looks like. It might not be a perfect example, but just to drive the point home, let's imagine that I showed a picture of Elizabeth II, the Queen of United Kingdom and other Commonwealth realms, to many people in a questionnaire, and I asked them, who is she according to you? Now imagine if all the Muslims answered every time, she is the Queen of Australia. It's technically true, but what about the fact that she's also the Queen of Great Britain? What about the Queen of England? What about the Queen of Scotland? What about the Queen of Canada? What about the Queen of many other places? If all the Muslims always answered Australia, it would be a biased underestimation of the Queen's role. Or imagine that every Christian, when asked the same question, said that she is the queen of the whole world and the seas. Wouldn't that be a gross overestimation of her role? Yes, she was officially the queen of many countries, but not the whole world, and not of the seas. So similarly, they are grossly overestimating or underestimating the role of Jesus. And after all, the biggest role of Jesus is to be the Messiah. Why not mention that? Why is that not the first thing which comes to their mind about Jesus? He is the Messiah, which means the chosen one. He was chosen by God to lead the believers, anyone who is sincere in his heart, to the city of believers, to lead them there and have a 1,000-year kingdom on earth without any imperfection. A perfect kingdom on earth for 1,000 years, where all of us, the believers, will live to show to Satan that you have to leave things in God's hand for things to go perfectly, which Satan couldn't do. Satan wanted to take control from God. So from all the people who ever lived, Satan hates Jesus the most because he's the one human being who directly disproves him. Satan wanted control from God so he can have a kingdom of his own on earth, while Jesus will do the reverse. He will let everything in God's hand so that God can create a perfect kingdom on earth, which will happen soon after we get resurrected. Now, let me address one important issue. I am fully aware that the Quran says that we should not make a distinction between any prophets. As a prophet, Jesus is like all the other prophets. But as a Messiah, he is the only Messiah mentioned in the Quran. So to summarize, if anyone asks you, who is Jesus? The best answer is, he is the Messiah. This answer annoys the most those who are furthest away from God's grace, and satisfies the most those who are the closest to God's grace. It's the answer which is most in line with how this question is answered in the Bible and how Jesus is confirmed and mentioned in the Quran.